In the dense forest just outside a small city in the Pacific Northwest, there is a clearing that does not look like a clearing. To anyone walking past, it appears to be ordinary undergrowth, ferns, fallen logs, a patch of moss-covered earth beneath a stand of Douglas fir trees. Nothing unusual, nothing worth a second glance. But behind those ferns, hidden beneath what looks like a natural fold in the hillside, is a shelter. A small, careful, beautifully constructed shelter that one man called home for nearly 7 years. His name is Daniel. He is 58 years old. He served 11 years in the United States Army, including 2 deployments to Iraq. He has a Bronze Star somewhere in a storage unit he can no longer afford to access. And until a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, when a young patrol officer named Marcus stopped to tie his bootlace at exactly the wrong spot, Daniel had managed to live invisibly inside that forest for 2,431 days. The local police department had walked, driven, and cycled past his shelter more than 1,000 times. They had patrolled that section of woods on foot during search operations. They had run cadaver dogs through it during a missing persons case in 2021. They had even held a training exercise in that exact clearing the year before. Not one of them ever saw him. This is the story of how a forgotten soldier used everything the Army taught him to disappear from a country that had already stopped looking. To understand how Daniel ended up in those woods, you have to understand who he was before them. He grew up in a small town in eastern Washington, the son of a logger and a part-time bookkeeper. He was the kind of teenager who took apart engines for fun and could fix a neighbor's lawnmower in an afternoon. His high school yearbook described him as quiet, dependable, and almost impossible to rattle. He enlisted at 19, 2 months after his father died of a heart attack on a job site. He told the recruiter he wanted to do something that mattered. He was assigned to a combat engineering unit and trained at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. By 22, he was a sergeant. By 25, he was running a small team of soldiers through some of the most dangerous roads in Anbar province, clearing improvised explosive devices from supply routes that other units refused to drive. His commanding officer, in a written commendation that Daniel still keeps folded in a waterproof pouch, described him as one of the most resourceful soldiers he had ever served with. The word the colonel used was uncanny. Daniel had an uncanny ability to see what others missed. He came home in 2010 with a partial hearing loss in his right ear, a knee that no longer bent properly, and a diagnosis that the VA classified as moderate post-traumatic stress disorder. He moved into a small apartment in a town near Joint Base Lewis McChord. He found work at an auto repair shop. For a while, he was fine. Then the paperwork started to disappear. Daniel's VA disability claim, the one that should have provided him with a steady monthly payment for the rest of his life, was filed in early 2013. According to records he has kept in a plastic folder, the claim was acknowledged. A case number was assigned. He attended 2 medical evaluations. And then, somewhere inside the system, the file simply vanished. He called the regional office. He was told to refile. He refiled. He waited 11 months. He was told the new file had been lost in a transfer between offices. He refiled again. He drove 4 hours to a regional office in person. He was told a supervisor would call him back within 10 business days. No one ever called. This is not a unique story. The Government Accountability Office has reported for years that the VA's backlog and document handling failures have left tens of thousands of veterans waiting on benefits they are legally entitled to. For most veterans, the result is frustration. For Daniel, who was already living paycheck to paycheck, it was the beginning of the end. The auto repair shop closed in 2015. He could not find another job that accommodated his bad knee. He fell 2 months behind on rent. His landlord, who Daniel describes as a decent man, who simply could not afford to carry a tenant, gave him a 60-day notice. By the summer of 2016, Daniel was living in his pickup truck in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store. The truck lasted 7 months. When the transmission gave out, he sold it for $400 and bought a tent. The tent lasted 3 weeks, and this is where the story turns. Because most veterans in Daniel's situation would have ended up in a shelter or on a sidewalk or in a doorway somewhere visible, Daniel did something different. Daniel went into the woods. He chose his location carefully. A patch of state forest land just outside the city limits, close enough that he could walk to a public library and a gas station, but far enough off any maintained trail that casual hikers would never wander into it. He spent 2 full weeks scouting before he committed. He looked for natural drainage, southern exposure for winter warmth, a screen of evergreen cover that would not lose its leaves, and a backstop of fallen timber that would break up the silhouette of any structure he built. He found his spot on a Tuesday morning in October of 2017. What he did next is what makes this story extraordinary. In the Army, combat engineers are trained in a discipline called field camouflage and concealment. It is the science of making something disappear in plain sight. It is not just about throwing leaves on a tarp. It involves understanding shadow, contour, color tone, reflective surfaces, scent management, sound discipline, and what the military calls track and sign. Every footprint, every snapped twig, every disturbed patch of moss tells a story. The job of the combat engineer is to erase that story. Daniel applied every single one of those skills to his new home. He began by digging, not a deep hole, a shallow, careful depression about 8 feet long and 5 feet wide, dropping the floor of his future shelter 18 inches below the surrounding forest floor. The displaced earth was carried away in small batches and scattered in a stream bed nearly half a mile away, so no fresh mound of dirt would ever appear near the site. He built the walls from deadfall, fallen branches, decaying logs, and roots that he gathered from a radius of more than a mile, never taking more than 1 or 2 pieces from any single location. He bound them together with paracord and what he could salvage from cast-off climbing rope at a nearby crag. The frame was low, never rising more than 3 feet above the surrounding ground. The roof was the masterpiece. He layered it in stages. First, a waterproof base of plastic sheeting, scavenged from a construction site dumpster, then a thick mat of moss, transplanted in small squares so it would continue to grow and blend with the surrounding forest. Then a final scattering of fern fronds and small branches that he refreshed every 2 weeks, always with material from a different direction, so no single patch of forest ever looked thin. The entrance was hidden behind a deliberately placed deadfall log. From the outside, the log appeared to have rolled naturally against a small rise in the terrain. From the inside, it lifted on a hinge made from a stripped tree branch. He used no metal. Metal reflects. Metal gives off a thermal signature in cold weather. He used no glass. He used no painted surfaces. Everything inside the shelter, from the small shelf where he kept his folded letters to the platform he slept on, was made from materials that were already part of the forest. He even managed his scent. He bathed in a creek nearly a mile from his shelter, never the same spot twice in a row. He buried his food waste in a rotation of locations far from camp. He never built a fire that produced visible smoke. For warmth in winter, he used a small alcohol stove, the kind that burns clean and leaves no plume. When you stand in that clearing today, even knowing where to look, it takes a long moment to see the shelter. The eye slides past it. The shape does not register. It is exactly what Daniel intended. His daily life inside that hidden world followed a careful rhythm. He woke at dawn. He drank water that he had collected the night before from a small spring and filtered through a system he built from sand, charcoal, and a coffee can. He ate a breakfast of oatmeal or whatever he had been able to scavenge or buy at a gas station the day before. Then he walked. Every single morning, no matter the weather, Daniel walked 3 miles into town. He went to the public library. He read the newspaper. He read history books, mostly about the American West and the Roman Empire. He used the public computers to check email accounts that no one wrote to anymore. The head librarian, a woman in her 60s named Patricia, eventually figured out that he was sleeping rough. She never asked where. She simply made sure he always had access to a working computer and never said anything when he stayed until closing. At the gas station 2 blocks from the library, a clerk named Reggie noticed that Daniel came in every other day, always bought the same things: a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a can of beans, and always paid in carefully counted small bills. Reggie started saving day-old sandwiches and giving them to Daniel free of charge. He did this for almost 4 years. There was a small network of unhoused people in the city who knew Daniel existed and knew, vaguely, that he lived somewhere in the woods. They protected him. When outreach workers came around asking questions, they said nothing. When a journalist came through the encampment under the highway in 2019 looking for stories, no one mentioned the veteran in the forest. They understood, in the way that people on the margins always understand, that some people need to be invisible to survive. Daniel was one of them. In all those years, he never panhandled. He never slept in a doorway. He never appeared on any homeless census. He existed in the woods, walked into town, and walked back out again. And the city he lived inside had no idea he was there. And then came that Tuesday afternoon in early spring. Officer Marcus had been with the department for less than 2 years. He was patrolling the edge of the state forest as part of a routine sweep, looking for the kinds of things officers usually look for on the edge of woods: drug paraphernalia, illegal campfires, signs of vandalism. He stopped at the edge of a clearing to retie his bootlace. He bent down, and as he stood up, his eye caught something that did not look right. It was a single fern frond, just one, and it was the wrong shade of green. Officer Marcus, in an interview he later gave to a local newspaper, said he could not explain why that one frond bothered him. It was a slightly paler color than the ferns around it. It looked, he said, the way a transplanted plant looks in the first week before it adjusts to its new soil. He walked over. He looked closer. He saw the edge of a moss seam that did not quite match. He saw a log that was almost, but not quite, in a natural position. He saw, finally, the outline of a man-made structure hidden inside what he had been certain was untouched forest. He drew his weapon. He called for backup. He approached the entrance, and then, after a long pause in which nothing happened, he holstered his weapon, knelt down, and said in a quiet voice that he was a police officer, and that he was not there to hurt anyone, and that he would like to speak with whoever was inside. Daniel came out slowly. He had his identification ready. He had been preparing for this moment for almost 7 years. What happened next is, in many ways, the most unusual part of this story. Officer Marcus did not arrest him. Camping on state forest land long-term is technically a violation, but Marcus did not file a citation. He sat on a fallen log with Daniel for almost 2 hours. He listened to the whole story. He looked at the folded commendation in the waterproof pouch. He looked at the carefully kept paperwork from the VA, the case numbers, the dates, the letters that had never been answered. Then he made a phone call. The call was to a regional director of a veteran advocacy nonprofit that Marcus's own father, a retired Marine, had volunteered with for years. By the end of that week, Daniel had a temporary apartment paid for by the nonprofit, a new VA caseworker assigned directly by a congressional liaison, and an appointment with a doctor who would, 6 months later, finally confirm the diagnosis that had been buried in a missing file for over a decade. His disability claim was approved in November of that year. The back pay, calculated from the original 2013 filing date, came to over $190,000. Daniel used the first portion of that money to pay back every person who had ever helped him. He paid Reggie at the gas station. He made an anonymous donation to the library where Patricia worked. He bought a used pickup truck. He rented a small house on the edge of the same town. And on weekends, when the weather is good, he sometimes walks back into those woods. The shelter is still there. The forest is slowly reclaiming it. The moss is growing over the roof in a way that even Daniel, with all his training, could not have engineered. In another 5 years, there will be thing left to see. He goes back, he says, not because he misses it, but because he wants to remember what he was capable of when he had nothing. There are an estimated 35,000 homeless veterans in the United States on any given night. The actual number, advocates argue, is likely far higher. Many of them, like Daniel, fell through the cracks in a benefit system that was supposed to catch them. Many of them are still out there, hidden in ways less skillful than his, but hidden nonetheless. They are in the woods behind shopping centers. They are in storage units. They are in cars parked overnight in lots like the one Daniel slept in for 7 months. Most of them will never have an officer, Marcus, stop to tie his bootlace at exactly the right moment. Daniel's story ends well, or as well as a story like this can end. But every time he tells it now in the small interviews he has agreed to give, he comes back to one thing. He survived in those woods because the Army taught him how to disappear. The country trained him to be invisible to enemies. And then, when he came home, it made him invisible to itself. The shelter in the forest is still out there. If you walked past it tomorrow, you would not see it. That was always the point.